My lesbian era began when the doctor ignored the rules. The emergency room lights burned too bright that night, making everything feel surreal and harsh, but nothing compared to the pain radiating through my chest as I watched my girlfriend of 3 years being wheeled away on a stretcher. Sarah's hand slipped from mine, her fingers cold and trembling, her face pale as moonlight. The paramedics had found her collapsed in our apartment, and I had ridden in the ambulance holding her hand, whispering promises that everything would be okay. But now, standing in the sterile waiting room with its outdated magazines and flickering, fluorescent lights, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The nurse at the desk had already told me twice that only immediate family could go back to see patients in critical care. I had tried to explain that I was her partner, that we had been together for years, that I was the person who knew her medical history and her fears and the way she needed someone to hold her hand when she was scared. But the nurse just looked at me with tired, indifferent eyes and repeated the rules as if they were carved in stone. Hours passed like years in that waiting room. I watched families come and go, watched husbands rush back to see their wives, watched mothers hold their sons, watched the automatic doors slide open and closed, each time bringing hope that someone would come out and tell me something, anything about Sarah's condition. My phone battery died around midnight. I had called her parents earlier, but they lived 8 hours away and wouldn't arrive until morning. They knew about us, accepted us even, but in this moment, their acceptance meant nothing because they weren't here and I couldn't be where I needed to be. I paced the worn linoleum floors until my feet ached, sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs until my back screamed, and tried not to think about all the worst-case scenarios that kept flooding my mind. Sarah had been having chest pains for weeks, brushing them off as stress from her new job. And I had believed her because I wanted to believe her, because neither of us wanted to face the possibility that something might be seriously wrong. Around 2 a.m, when the waiting room had emptied except for an elderly man sleeping in the corner, a doctor emerged through the double doors. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she looked exhausted in a way that suggested she had been on shift for far too long. She scanned the waiting room, her eyes landing on me, and I stood up so quickly that I nearly knocked over the cold coffee I had been clutching for the past hour. She walked toward me with purposeful steps, and I braced myself for whatever news she was about to deliver, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. But instead of stopping at a professional distance, she came close enough that I could see the compassion in her dark eyes, and she said in a low voice that only I could hear that Sarah was stable but would need to stay for observation, and then she asked me if I wanted to see her. I must have looked confused because I stammered something about the rules, about not being family, about how I had been told repeatedly that I couldn't go back. The doctor glanced over her shoulder at the nurses station where the same tired nurse was now focused on her computer screen, and then she looked back at me with an expression that I would never forget. It was a look that said she understood, that she saw me, that she knew exactly what it felt like to love someone and be kept away from them by arbitrary rules that didn't account for the many forms that family could take. She didn't say anything about breaking protocol or making exceptions. She simply said that Sarah had been asking for me, that she was frightened and in pain, and that the doctor believed patients healed better when they had their loved ones beside them. Then she held the door open and waited for me to follow her through. Walking down that hospital corridor felt like entering another world. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of antiseptic burned my nostrils, but none of that mattered, because I was finally going to see Sarah. The doctor led me past several rooms, her white coat swishing with each step, and she told me quietly that Sarah had experienced a severe panic attack complicated by arrhythmia, that her heart was okay but that she needed rest and medication and monitoring. She explained the treatment plan in simple terms, never making me feel stupid for not understanding medical jargon, and I realized that this doctor was doing more than just breaking a hospital rule. She was treating me like I mattered, like my relationship with Sarah was real and valid and important. When we reached Sarah's room, the doctor touched my shoulder gently and told me I could stay as long as I needed. that she would handle any questions from the nursing staff, and then she disappeared back down the hallway before I could even thank her properly. Sarah looked so small in that hospital bed, dwarfed by white sheets and connected to monitors that beeped rhythmically. Her eyes were closed, but when I whispered her name, they fluttered open, and the relief that flooded her face nearly broke me. I rushed to her side, took her hand in both of mine, and felt her squeeze back weakly. She tried to smile, but tears were already streaming down her cheeks, and she whispered that she had been so scared, that she thought she might die without seeing me again, that the worst part of everything had been not knowing if I was out there, waiting, or if they had sent me home. I pressed my forehead against hers and promised her that I wasn't going anywhere, that I would stay right there beside her for as long as she needed me. We didn't talk much after that. Sometimes the most powerful moments are the ones where words fail and all that remains is presence. The simple act of being there, breathing together, existing in the same space. As the night wore into early morning, I sat in the chair beside Sarah's bed, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of sleep. The monitors continued their steady beeping, a rhythm that became oddly comforting in its consistency. I thought about that doctor, about the choice she had made to see our relationship as worthy of acknowledgement, about how much courage it must have taken to bend rules in a system that wasn't designed to accommodate people like us. I thought about all the times Sarah and I had been invisible, all the forms that didn't have a box for our relationship, all the awkward conversations where we had to explain that yes, we were together and no, we weren't just roommates or friends. I thought about how exhausting it was to constantly justify our love to a world that often refused to recognize it, and how much that one doctor's simple act of kindness had meant in that moment. When Sarah's parents arrived early the next morning, they thanked me for staying with her, and the relief in their eyes told me they understood how much those hours had mattered. They took over the vigil beside her bed, and I finally allowed myself to step out into the hallway, my legs stiff and my eyes burning with exhaustion. The doctor who had let me through was standing at the nurse's station, reviewing charts, and when she saw me, she walked over with 2 cups of coffee from the cafeteria. We sat together in a quiet corner, and I finally managed to thank her, my voice cracking with emotion. She told me that she had seen too many people suffer alone because of outdated policies, that she had made a promise to herself years ago that she would never let protocol stand in the way of compassion. Then she said something that changed the way I saw myself and my relationship forever. She said that love is love, that it doesn't matter who you love or how you love them, that what matters is showing up and being present and fighting for the people who matter most. That conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes, but it sparked something inside me that had been dormant for too long. For years, Sarah and I had lived our lives trying to fit into spaces that weren't designed for us, trying to make ourselves smaller so that others would feel more comfortable, accepting crumbs of recognition and being grateful for them. But sitting there with that doctor who had risked her professional standing to honor my relationship, I realized that we deserved more than crumbs. We deserved full recognition, full visibility, full acknowledgement of what we meant to each other. My lesbian era didn't begin when I first realized I was attracted to women, or when I first kissed Sarah, or when we moved in together. It began that night in the hospital when someone in a position of authority looked at my love and said it was worthy of breaking the rules for. Sarah recovered fully over the following weeks. The arrhythmia was managed with medication, and the panic attacks became less frequent as she learned coping mechanisms and reduced her stress levels. But something had shifted in both of us after that night. We stopped apologizing for who we were. We started using the word partner louder and more proudly. We began seeking out spaces and communities where our relationship was celebrated, rather than merely tolerated. We found doctors who included same-sex partners in medical decision-making, lawyers who understood our unique legal needs, and friends who saw us as a unit, rather than 2 individuals who happened to live together. We started attending Pride events, not just as participants but as people who finally understood that visibility mattered, that being seen mattered, that every time we held hands in public or introduced each other as partners, we were making space for others who would come after us. I tried to find that doctor again several times. I wanted to tell her how much her kindness had changed my life, how that one night had set me on a path toward authentic living that I hadn't even known. I was capable of, but the hospital staff was always vague about which doctor had been on duty that night, and I began to wonder if perhaps she had faced consequences for her decision to bend the rules. The thought haunted me, the idea that someone might have suffered professionally for showing me compassion, but it also reinforced something I had come to understand. Real change often requires sacrifice. Real progress demands that people in positions of power make choices that might cost them something, and that those of us who benefit from those choices honor them by living openly and proudly. Years have passed since that night in the emergency room, and Sarah and I are still together, stronger now than we were then. We got married in a small ceremony surrounded by people who love and support us. We bought a house with a garden where we grow vegetables and flowers. We adopted a rescue dog who sleeps between us at night. We built a life that is ordinary and extraordinary all at once, a life that we no longer have to justify or explain to anyone. But I still think about that doctor often, especially when I encounter systems and structures that don't recognize or validate queer relationships. I think about how one person's choice to see me, really see me, gave me permission to see myself differently. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of a time when someone's kindness changed everything for you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we all need reminders that love is worth fighting for, that visibility matters, and that small acts of courage can create ripples that change lives. Your support helps stories like this reach people who might be struggling to find their own voice, their own community, their own moment of recognition. The world is slowly changing. More hospitals now have policies that recognize domestic partners. More forms include options for diverse family structures. More people are willing to stand up and say that love deserves recognition regardless of who is doing the loving. But we're not there yet, not completely, and that's why these stories matter. That's why sharing our experiences, our struggles, and our moments of breakthrough is so important. Every time someone shares a story about being seen and validated, they create space for someone else to step into that light. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. In the comments below, share one word that describes how this story made you feel, or tell us about a time when someone broke the rules for you. When someone chose compassion over protocol, your words matter, your experiences matter. This community is built on the courage it takes to be visible, and I want to hear from you. My lesbian era began when a doctor ignored the rules, but it continued because I chose to honor that gift by living authentically. It continued because Sarah and I decided that our love was worth celebrating, not hiding. It continued because we found community and created family and built a life that reflects who we truly are. And it continues still every day, in every choice we make to be visible, to be present, to be unapologetically ourselves. That night in the hospital taught me that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply acknowledging that someone exists, that their love is real, that they deserve to be seen. And once you've been truly seen, once someone has looked at you and said that you matter, you can never go back to being invisible. You carry that moment with you forever, a light that guides you through darkness, a reminder that you are worthy of recognition, of love, of all the beautiful, ordinary moments that make up a life fully lived.